So welcome, everybody. I'm Zach Schulman, class of 87 and law 1990, and I direct the Entrepreneurship at Cornell program that we call E at C. Thanks for joining us today for our latest conversation with an expert entrepreneur, in this case, also an expert academic. So it was exactly a year ago that CEN, which is the Cornell Entrepreneur Network, and Entrepreneurship at Cornell teamed up to bring you our first webinar with a top-ranked entrepreneur. And those are instead of our online presentations, all dictated by COVID, obviously. And the response has been absolutely amazing, by the way. Great content. I've gotten so many emails from people after either a particular event or just in general, stating how much they've enjoyed the webinar. So we will likely continue this post-COVID. There really is no reason to stop. So we do have extraordinary entrepreneurs that have graduated from Cornell in one capacity or the other. And we are thrilled today to have a conversation with Dr. Leslie Leinwand, who is at the University of Colorado and also a bio-entrepreneur, as we'll find out more today. So before we get started with our fireside chat, just a couple of quick housekeeping things. You can learn more about CEN and E at C on the links that will appear in the chat. Our format today is a fireside chat conversation with some added Q&A. I've gotten a bunch of questions in advance, and we'll also take your questions live. What we do ask is that you use the chat box for your questions and make sure that you select all panelists and attendees so that everybody can see your question, and that way we can cut down on repetitive questions. We are recording the program today, so you can review it later, either on the CEN live stream channel or the Entrepreneurship at Cornell YouTube channel. Also, all the back episodes are also there, and we'll also be throwing those links in the chat. Okay, so let's get started. I'm honored to welcome Leslie today, class of 72 from Cornell. We're going to hear all about her Cornell story in just a bit. She is the leader of the molecular, cellular, and developmental biology, distinguished professor and chief science officer of the BioFrontiers Institute at Colorado University in Boulder. That's a mouthful, Leslie. And I may have gotten some of it wrong. I hope not. But let's start at the beginning. I think that would be the funnest based on what you and I talked about before. So I understand that you grew up in South Carolina and that you started your college experience at a place near your hometown. I would love to hear a little bit about that experience and then how you came to transfer to Cornell, leaving the Carolinas behind you.
Yep. So I grew up in initially North Carolina and then South Carolina. And I was at the time thinking that I wanted to go to medical school and that I would go to a college and probably study biology. That was something I was really interested in from high school. And I had set my sights on maybe UNC Chapel Hill or Duke, which was where my stepbrother had gone. And I had a family that had a bit of a bias against women becoming educated. And my stepfather particularly didn't think that women should go to college at all. And so they gave me a 3-hour radius driving from my hometown and said, go someplace within that radius. And it had to be a certain type of college, small, meaning small liberal arts, which I think can be a great experience. And so I went to Salem College in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and had this fantastic experience with my biology professor. He could see that I had a passion for genetics and that I really wanted to be able to do some science, at the bench. Yeah. And that wasn't an option really at that college. It was actually a very nice college to be at, tiny place to be. And he told me that I really needed to get out of there and go to a university where I could actually work in a laboratory. And he had gotten his PhD at Cornell. And so he said, I'm going to tell your family that they need to send you to summer school and that I'm requiring it to take organic chemistry. And my family did not understand, I think, really, that he had no right, in fact, to require that I go to Cornell University for summer school.
So first you had to convince your father, your stepdad, to let you go to school.
In the first place, right.
Then he set a 3-hour radius, and maybe your mom joined in that as well, set this 3-hour radius. And then you had to surreptitiously get the biology professor / mentor to get you up to Cornell.
Yes. And so he wrote this very formal letter to them on letterhead, and they looked at it and said, oh, okay. And I really never looked back. I came to summer school at Cornell that summer, and it was a struggle. I mean, I had been in an institution where I was always, getting the best grades in the room, and that
Right.
no longer was true. So it was a real rude awakening to me, and probably really good for me to be challenged tremendously, which I was. And I fell in love with Cornell and felt that it was really what I needed to do. And so I transferred, not with much enthusiasm from my family. So I ended up, I think I might have mentioned this to you the other day, I ended up being a waitress in a fraternity, which was really bad. That's one of the worst jobs I think that you could have. But it was so liberating to be at a place where it was actually really applauded if you were a serious student, that was a good thing rather than something that you were not necessarily encouraged to do, which was sort of my experience. And
did they cut you off at that point? Like, were they like, you want to go to Ithaca, you're on your own?
Yeah, pretty much. And my stepbrother took some pity on me, though. He felt kind of bad because he had gotten this great education at Duke, and he was sending me money on the side to help out, which was kind of wonderful. But you have to remember, my family, or not remember, but you have to know, my family felt like you had to get a passport to leave the South, that you needed, to go above the Mason-Dixon line. And so it was for them, I think they viewed it as, this crazy thing to do, to go to, upstate New York. And when I transferred, I showed up with this little wool coat. I had never been in the cold before, serious cold. And I immediately realized I was going to freeze to death if I didn't actually get equipped to deal with the winters in Ithaca.
Yeah. And did you actually live on campus? I'm just curious.
Yeah, well, so I lived in a sorority house, Delta Gamma.
Okay.
And I did live in a dorm the summer I was there for summer school, but I ended up joining a sorority so that I could live on campus, more or less.
Yeah. So that's just absolutely fascinating. I'm sure everyone's delighted that you were able to break that barrier, and obviously look at the things you've done now. It's just unbelievable. So you were at Cornell for your junior and senior years. What were you thinking about your desired career choices as you planned to leave Cornell?
Yeah, so I had, as I said, I had a mindset about going to medical school, and I knew that I had needed to work in a lab to be able to be competitive for medical school. And I told my advisor, was Ross McIntyre, and I ended up loving working in this lab doing fruit fly genetics. And he said to me, why do you want to go to medical school? Why don't you actually become a scientist? And that wasn't a career choice that I even had ever thought about, frankly. And I said for a minute, well, I love this. And he said, well, why don't you do this following? Why don't you apply to medical school, and why don't you apply to graduate school? And then you can make a decision after you find out, about it. And I got into both, and I realized I didn't really want to do that. I really fell in love with genetics and went to Yale, where I got my degree in biology, but my my PhD was in human genetics. And that kind of passion has stayed with me ever since.
Right, that's incredible. By the way, I meant to ask you, is the biology teacher from high school still alive?
From my college in
From
North
college,
Carolina,
I mean, from college.
yes, he absolutely is. And I have stayed in touch with him ever since. He's retired, but I saw him probably 5 or 6 years ago. I got a fairly nice award from a foundation here in Colorado. And I invited him to fly here to go to that awards luncheon. And they only gave me a couple of, maybe 3 minutes to accept the award. And I told my husband and daughter, I said, look, I'm going to thank you too, but I'm going to tell a story about Jim Edwards. And he came, he flew out, and I told that story about how he had changed my life.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. It probably brought a tear to his eye. I'm sure.
It brought a tear to his eye and mine.
Yeah. That's great. Okay, so you completed your PhD at Yale in 1978, and then you went on to do your postdoc at Rockefeller University in 1981. I'm curious, from your experiences getting your PhD and your postdoc, like what professional or experiential nuggets did you learn at that stage of your career? Did you feel, for example, a gender disparity gap? I'm guessing you must have, because it was such a long time ago, and even now it probably still exists. But I'm curious as to what it was like back then.
I never did. It's very interesting. I was the first female postdoc in the lab that I went to as a postdoc at Rockefeller, and I didn't know that. And yeah, there weren't too many of us, but I somehow never felt that I was at any kind of disadvantage. And that followed me to my first faculty position at Albert Einstein. There were many, many very successful women leaders there. And I still remember inviting a male colleague to give a talk, and we sat down at lunch, and he looked at me and he said, "Did you do this on purpose?" I said, "Do what?" And he said, "It's all women." And I said, "Yes, and what's your point?" And he said, "I couldn't fill up a table with women faculty leaders at my institution. I couldn't even find them." And I said, "Seriously, I didn't even think about it. I thought who would be the best people for you to talk to." And so I think that I don't actually feel that I have experienced any disadvantage in my career. That isn't to say that hasn't impacted other people, because I know it has.
No, absolutely it has.
But I have not felt it.
Yeah. It almost, when we talked before, and I loaded that question purposely, obviously, but it seems like you've almost ignored it. Like it doesn't even factor in. It's just, you're just a wonderful scientist doing your thing, and your expertise and abilities to speak for themselves, which I just think is incredible.
Well, I think that I think the best way you can lead is by example. And when I started this BioFrontiers Institute, probably 13, 14, maybe even 15 years ago, the president of the university was a woman. I was the director of this institute, and the two associate directors were women, and scientists and engineers. And people kept saying to me, "You must have done this deliberately." Well, of course, I couldn't have an effect on the sex or the gender of the president, but it was true that right from the top through, it was all women. And I never thought about it. I actually picked the best people.
Right.
And to this day, our institute has way more women, full professors and directors of cores, et cetera, than probably most of our sister institutes and departments.
Yep. And from what you just said, you are not attributing that to unconscious bias. You're just attributing, because it's just the way it worked out. The best people got the jobs, and it's worked out great. So I'm gonna this next question I have is sort of a long one, so just bear with me for a second. But I think it's useful for the audience to actually hear some of the background. So continuing on your timeline journey. So after Rockefeller, I'm guessing, and I think it's probably true, that you were viewed as a special talent in your field of molecular biology. And then you then accepted a position at Albert Einstein College of Medicine in 1981. And you stayed there for 14 years, which is a long time. And then you were recruited away from Albert Einstein to be the chair of the molecular, cellular and developmental biology department at University of Colorado in Boulder. And then you became the chief science officer of the Biofrontiers Institute, also at UC Boulder. And I believe that this is the point in your career when you were at the Frontiers Institute that you got the CFO at the University of Colorado to see what I call the light, because I deal with this all the time, to see the light regarding entrepreneurship and corporate, what I'll call overlap in terms of using the building, which was built for the Institute. And I think it'd be interesting for our audience to hear how you convinced the CFO at the university to see this light and engage in these entrepreneurial activities on campus.
Yeah, so the Institute was actually many years after I moved here. So it really started right when I moved here to be chair of the department, because the building had been built for that department. We also have a new building that maybe we'll get to later that was built in more recently. But I had been hired here to recruit 22 faculty to add to the existing department. So there was this brand new building that was empty. I was the first person who moved into it, along with a new faculty member I had just hired. And there was all this empty space. And I was not even thinking so much in terms of my own career founding biotech companies, but I was thinking about how the department might be able to benefit from being able to rent some of this huge amount of space that was empty and not bringing in any revenue, because it was going to take years to hire 22 people to fill it. And it just seemed like a waste to me, and the department ought to be able to benefit from it. And so I went to the CFO and asked him if it would be possible for me to rent out space to local biotech companies, because Boulder's, not the East or the West Coast, but it's got a pretty burgeoning biotech presence. And he told me no, that it was too complicated, that there would be intellectual property issues, it was liability, it was just going to be too complicated. And without even thinking about it, I said, what if I give you half the rent? And he said, deal. And then I said, I should have offered you 30%. And he said, that's right, you should have, but you didn't. So it was the beginning of a movement on campus, honestly, because there was a lot of resistance initially by the CFO. And then they realized that they could actually just make an agreement that would be applicable to renting lab space all across campus, because there's not a lot of empty space, but there are some times when there's vacancies of the faculty member leaves or retires or whatever. And so to this day, in this newer building that I'm currently in, which is the Biofrontiers Institute, we have 7 or 8 companies in the building. And we've actually never had a problem with IP. And it's been a wonderful idea for exchange of technologies and internships for CU undergraduates during the summers. And it's been actually wonderful, to the point that we're now contemplating a co-location building where we alternate biotech companies with faculty. And there was, and even now a little bit less so, resistance to this notion of having academics straddling biotech ventures versus their academic labs. And I don't think that's necessarily for everybody. You don't have to be in that arena. I think it's perfectly fine to do science that is for pure science sake. Just like I think there's a place for people who do applied science that might translate into improvements in human health.
Well, I mean, it's very interesting, the conflicts between that could arise with companies being on campus and intellectual property issues. I mean, those are things that most big research universities face. And I think it's wonderful that you got them to see the light so easily Just by,
Well,
just.
it wasn't as easy as I made it sound. We decided we were going to try to offer some rental space, office space to some VC firms, and I hit a wall on that one. But that one I finally just stopped because we didn't have that much space to offer. So
yeah. So someone just asked an appropriate question. They said, "How do you deal with IP issues with the companies that are on campus?" I mean, can you simplify it with an explanation?
Yeah, so the concern that most companies had was mainly companies that have gotten big enough that they have, a lot of lawyers and HR people. So we do rent one big chunk of space to a company called Agilent. And they want everything doors locked. They don't want students to be able to walk through the space. So this works much better when it's small companies. And it's actually, frankly, a lot more fun when it's small companies. And our labs are designed to be open labs. So we might have 3 companies in the same physical space, which even I was a little bit worried about that. The kinds of conversations you might be having over in the corner with a whiteboard. And in fact, some of the companies have actually started collaborations with each other in our building. And we have not had a single example where there's been any concern, but from any of the company people. And they know that if they rent space in our building, there will be students walking through their labs. I mean, that's just part of the deal. And they cannot lock the doors and keep students from walking around because these are interspersed with academic labs. So we cannot restrict access.
Right. I mean, how about the leakage of university-owned IP leaking to the company? Is that an issue?
Not so far. We really haven't had it.
Yeah, because I know that's always a concern.
Sure.
When faculty are working with companies. So I think, my personal view is that the university should be aware of the concern, but they should let as much interaction happen as possible. Because in the long run, it's better for the university.
Yeah, and I will give a plug for our university being very, very open compared to even where I was before Albert Einstein. They were always being very defensive about interactions with companies. And CU does not get a lot of money from the state of Colorado. It's just a fact. And so they encourage people to be entrepreneurial. And it makes it much easier to have relationships with companies.
Yep, absolutely. I just got another question, which is, I hope I don't put you on the spot with this one. It might a little bit, but this is from a woman, I think, Deepti. She said, "I'm building a platform for women entrepreneurs. Would you be open to doing a few short video segments? Your story is so inspiring. It'll give so many people firepower. We need more role models."
Oh, that's very nice. The answer is absolutely.
Yeah. So Deepti, you can email me after, and I'll make an introduction. My email is zjs2@cornell.edu. Maybe someone could throw that in the chat. Okay, I'm going to move forward. So let's talk about some of the company stuff now. So in 1996, you co-founded Myogen. That company raised close to just over $200 million and went public in 2003, I believe. And then it was sold to Gilead in 2006 for about $2.5 billion, which is a pretty good exit in anyone's book. So
particularly in that year.
Yeah, that year, absolutely, in 2006. So can you explain what Myogen did, like what the products were, what your role was there, and how you maintained your full-time role in academia as well?
Mm-hmm. So I knew nothing about business. I still don't consider myself to be an expert in developing business plans, et cetera. And I was approached by the then chief of cardiology, Mike Bristow, who had already found some small number of companies. And he had approached me when I was being recruited here because CU Boulder is not the medical school is down in Aurora, which is near Denver. And I had moved from Albert Einstein, which is a freestanding medical school in New York, in the Bronx. And I was very nervous about moving to CU Boulder, which is a undergraduate research university, where that's a very different culture than being at a medical school. So I had gotten very involved with the medical school here in cardiology, because it was really important to me to have access to people who treat patients as well as patient samples, et cetera. And Mike had said to me, why don't we co-found an institute between the two campuses, and we'll actually incorporate a biotech company into that structure. And that turned out not to be allowed. So we had to form a separate entity for the company. And the idea was to develop drugs for heart failure. And myo means muscle, and the heart's a muscle, so hence the myogen. The model for this company was to in-license drugs that had been developed for other things and then repurpose them for things in the heart. And we had an R&D program there, but the board of directors had less than zero interest in that, because of course the pipeline was 12 to 15 years and, very poor success rate, et cetera. So the R&D part was mainly to appease the two scientific founders, Eric Olson and myself. And Mike Bristow was kind of the clinical trials genius who could look at drugs and try to say, okay, we could maybe use this to treat, it's approved for disease X, but we might be able to use it for disease Y. And at the time, it was a relatively new concept to repurpose drugs, that would be the business plan. And so we spent a lot of time going all over the world, frankly, raising money, and as well as looking for compounds that might be able to be repurposed. And the R&D part, as I said, I think was more almost a hobby from the standpoint of the board. Eric Olson and I, the two scientific founders, Mike was an MD, PhD cardiologist, and Eric and I went into the CEO's office and told him that we really thought we deserved more stock than what we had gotten, because we discovered that all founders were not created equal. And I, as I mentioned to you, I was kind of an idiot, because I didn't even know there were types of stock that were different. I didn't know there was dilutable and non-dilutable stock. I just didn't know. And so I signed the agreements without showing them to a lawyer, which was really naive on my part. And I thought, oh, okay, it's Myogen's lawyers are telling me this is okay, so I should just sign these documents. And I showed it to one of my entrepreneurial friends, and he said, you're a moron for not showing this to me or somebody else before you sign this. Anyway, so we went in to see the CEO and said that we thought we deserved more stock. And he said, from the board of directors standpoint, you founders are useless. Eric was like, nobody's ever called me useless before. We were just kind of stunned. And then the CEO said, bring us a biotech deal or a big pharma deal, and then we'll have a different conversation. So we did. We went to Novartis and we got a deal for R&D. And, we were rewarded for that activity. But in the end, the analogy that I think is probably the most graphic is the time after the company had been sold. Our CEO made a big donation personally to our institute, the BioFrontiers Institute. And after he had told us over dinner that he was going to give us this money, we walked out of the restaurant and I saw this car that was like my dream car, James Bond, Aston Martin, silver, in front of the restaurant. And I said, oh my God, look at that car. And he picked up the key and, the beep. I said, that's yours? I said, I can't believe it. I said, you know what I'm driving is a used BMW station wagon. And so that just tells you kind of the proportional financial endpoints after that. So, I didn't do this for the money, but I did learn a lot about not being naive. I would say that.
So let's take a step back, by the way. So all this time that you were the chief science officer at Myogen, developing these drugs, you also maintained your full-time status at the university?
Yeah, I never worked for Myogen. I'm the CSO of our BioFrontiers Institute, which is an academic thing. So but you're asking a question that I think is relevant in the context of this kind of discussion, which is, how do you really do both things? And that's one of the reasons I've never actually worked at any of the companies I co-founded. I spend time there, and I probably spent more time at Myocardia, which is the most recent company. But I never exceeded anything that puts me into any conflict. There was one semester that I took my university appointment down to 70% so I could spend more time at the company. And that was great. I actually did love it, I have to say. And our CEO at Myocardia wanted me to come be the CSO of our company, but I didn't want to do it because I did not want to give up my academic lab, give up my mentoring of students. I mean, I love that too much. Yep.
So were you involved with fundraising at Myogen? Yeah, I think you mentioned you were.
Yes. It was painful. The VC community can be quite brutal.
Yeah. Well, why don't you give us some examples, particularly, it wasn't that long ago, actually, but I'd love to hear some of the examples of how it can be so brutal.
Well, I remember going to visit some VCs. This was for Myogen, so I didn't have the track record that I had in co-founding Myocardia. So I hadn't already founded. This was my first. And I still remember this. We were in an office in a VC trying to raise money a little bit at a time. So this was not, we were at Myogen, we were raising money, 100,000, 200,000, 300,000, to get to 200 million, we did start raising much more money because heart failure clinical trials are extremely expensive. And so I got better at it. And as we got more momentum, it did get to be easier. But those first few, I had one VC call me a molecular gymnast. and he didn't mean it as a compliment because we were talking about changing genes and doing this and doing that. And he actually did say that. And I thought, wow, when I think NIH panels are tough, they're not as tough as the VCs.
Oh my gosh, that's just crazy. And let's bump now to Myocardia also. So that one started in 2012. I think you mentioned it raised about $140 million, went public in 2015, and then was sold to Bristol Myers Squibb just in October 2020, so relatively recently, at a $13 billion valuation.
Yes.
So first of all, huge congrats on that. That's a very recent, huge transaction. We're all smiling from ear to ear. Tell us about your founding team at Myocardia first, and we can just start with that one.
Yeah. So my long-term academic collaborator, Jim Sputich from Stanford, contacted me in probably 2011 and asked me if I had another company in me, because he had also co-founded a company that was publicly traded called Cytokinetics. And he and I had discussed years and years ago, wouldn't it be great if we could treat inherited genetic diseases of the heart? And it was something that had been a dream of mine. And as opposed to Myogen, which was what we call garden variety heart failure. So not inherited heart failure, but acquired, inherited, all lumped together. That's a really tough nut, and it's one of the biggest healthcare costs in the world. And so this was a very targeted idea, was to find people with incurable genetic heart disease and be able to treat, because for this particular disease, which is the one that kills young athletes frequently, it's tragic. There's no treatment except a heart transplant. Or there wasn't. Now there is. And the idea was precisely that. So very focused, very targeted, and very genetically based, which is, of course, where my origins start.
Right.
So we happen to know one of the founding partners of Third Rock Ventures, and Charles Homsey, who's a cardiologist, and I had known him for years. And he got us to come to the offices in Mission Bay and make a pitch to a couple of the partners. And they liked what they heard, and then told us to come to Boston. And they brought in some key opinion leaders, and they got us to make a pitch to the whole team. And we were thinking that this would be more like angel investing when we went to talk to them. And Jim and I met with the partners after everybody else had left, and they said, well, we're not going to do angel investing. And so Jim and I stood up and said, well, thank you very much. We were ready to leave. And they said, no, sit down. We're going to fund the whole thing. So we were stunned, frankly. And I think that it was a great experience founding this company. And we did bring in John and Cricket Seidman as the third set of co-founders. And Cricket and John really discovered the genetic basis for this tragic disease that kills young athletes. And she is a clinician who sees a lot of patients with it. And so that ended up being a great addition to our team, because she had the clinical expertise and really could tell us more about patients and their symptoms. And it turned out to be a wonderful team. And frankly, having Third Rock fund this, they brought in their own Charles Homsey as the interim CEO. And the business development guy was also from Third Rock. So no more of this, us hiring every single person, finding the lab space. I mean, we did that whole thing for Myogen. And I didn't find that to be fun, frankly. And so they did ultimately bring in external CEO and business development person, but we had really, really experienced people, setting the whole thing up. The only requirement was that it had to be in Boston or in the Bay Area.
And you picked the Bay Area? That's where
we did, because it was close to Jim, because Palo Alto is pretty close by, and it was frankly really close for me because it's only a 2-hour flight.
Right. So when you're looking at a company like Myocardia, like what made you think it was a good bet in terms of, okay, you have a problem, like the problem was well known, and how did you start to target and think that problem was solvable?
Yeah. So between Jim and me, we had 70 years of academic research experience focused on this molecule that we targeted. And myosin is a motor protein. And between the two of us, we knew more about that molecule than probably any two other people, because we'd been studying it for so long. I sometimes joke that I wondered whether somebody would say, well, how come you guys haven't solved every problem that there is? You've been working on this for 70 years. But I'll turn it around the other way and say that because we know so much about this, it was very good to be able to say, okay, let's put our collective experience together with Cricket's experience with the patients who have mutations in this gene, and not lose focus. And so the company stayed incredibly focused on this group of proteins that we knew so much about that make your heart contract. And We didn't let ourselves get distracted by other things. I think that was actually crucial.
Mhm.
And because, the BD people are always out there looking for stuff, and they'd run stuff by us. Well, why don't we try this? Why don't we get involved in that? And unlike other companies, the founders stayed incredibly in touch with the science that was going on at the company. And even though none of us ever went and worked there, I was there for a while. I was there once a week. And Jim and I would spend the entire day there just talking science so we didn't get involved so much in the business development part of this. They'd run ideas by us and we would say yay or nay, we don't think so. But most of it was just the science. And so that was really, I think, exciting. And they wanted our input. I mean, they loved to get
Right.
input.
And now is the drug, is there a drug in the market now that's treating this?
It got approved last Friday.
Last Friday.
Yeah.
Wow. So you weren't joking when you said it's now available. It's like really.
Yeah. It's not out there until a little bit, a few more months from now, but the FDA gave approval last Friday.
Wow. And how many people suffer from this?
So about 1 in 500. It's probably more than that, right? So it could be as much as 1 in 250. And not everybody who has these mutations dies. So there are people who are symptomatic. There are even people who have the mutations who are asymptomatic, but they have a very high risk of developing the disease later in life.
Okay. Interesting. Well, congratulations on that too. I bet Bristol Myers is delighted.
They are, and unfortunately in the press release, they didn't even mention myocardia. Because of course, myocardia doesn't exist anymore.
Was there any earnout based on the drug getting approved, or was that all old history?
That's all old history, okay. I would say. Yeah.
Okay, good. So do you plan on doing another company?
I'm thinking about it. It's
obviously still in the heart space based on what you.
Yeah, it might expand into skeletal muscle space, but I do have a lot of, right now is kind of a sweet spot. So a few of us have been talking about, I think it'd be pretty easy for us to get financial support to do something again. Because, and I've been being contacted by VCs quite a bit, as you might expect, about why don't you start another company? We don't care what it is, which is it's a nice place to be.
I mean, why not just do it again with Third Rock? They have such a wonderful reputation in this area.
Yeah, I really like them a lot.
Yeah, they're great. For those that don't know, there's a Cornellian or two involved at Third Rock as well. So it's always kind of fun to give them a plug. But they are really, there's a special set of VCs that are true company builders.
That's right.
As Leslie explained, that they take ideas that are very well baked, but they literally build a company around the concept and get very, very extremely involved and fund the entire thing typically. So it's not the typical VC model. It's more of a true building model, and they're one of a handful. There really aren't too many. I want to go up a level and make it a little more broad on my questions just for a bit. And I have a bunch of questions from the audience too that I'm going to try to get to. Can you share one lesson learned the hard way at Myogen that you did not replicate at Myocardia?
Yeah, showing these documents to a lawyer that isn't working for the company.
So you were better protected?
Yes.
And I guess
I didn't, it was actually pretty straightforward this time. I was looking for like things that I could find, and it actually was pretty straightforward.
Right. So did you ever buy your Aston Martin?
No, but my husband did buy me a new car because I had never in my life owned a new car.
Until when?
Until 5 years ago.
I'm not going to ask. So you can tell us what kind of car it is if you want to. I mean, I'm not.
So it's a new BMW. No, but I'm not. You don't know me, but I'm not a car person. I mean, even though I looked at that Aston Martin and thought how beautiful it was, I would, I just never thought buying a new car. I thought it was a waste of money
Yeah.
just because, you can get one for so much cheaper if it's been driven for 10,000 miles.
That's very true. That's very true. You're just showing more of your savvy. Okay, can you share 3 of your favorite secrets of success based on your journey, be it business, academic, or personal?
Yeah, I can. They're not going to be news flashes, really, but one of the things that I think is key to the way I work is very simple conceptually, which is to pick your battles. And I think that has served me incredibly well. And not only pick your battles so that you only enter into battles that you can win, because that's really important, but also know which ones to pick, not just based on whether you can win, but how important are they?
Okay.
So that has, as I said, that has served me incredibly well, both in my academic life, my personal life, and my biotech life.
Right. So is that all 3 combined, or is that number 1?
Which?
Well, I'm going to say, because I asked for 3 secrets of success.
I'm
that
getting
sounded like 1.
Now I'm getting to my second one. That's
okay.
Yeah. So my second one is also true for all aspects of my life, which is you got to be passionate about what you're doing. And for me, that passion for discovery and translating your research into something that could be useful for humans in both health and disease is what drives me, is being passionate about it. I sometimes think about how lucky I am to be wanting to discover new things and to learn all the time. And it's something that I think fuels me, is being passionate about it, because I feel like I'm still learning and I have a lot to learn, and I look forward to it. I love learning.
Yeah.
And then the third thing for me, I think, is, again, not a secret, but the reason that I founded this BioFrontiers Institute was because, human health is very, very complex and requires true interdisciplinary approaches to things, to solving those problems. And so this institute that I founded has this new building that I was mentioning to you, where we have all these companies in the building. We have physicists and computer scientists and mathematicians and chemists and biologists and tissue engineers, all in the same building. And, as I said at the beginning, just like with biotech, it's not for everybody. But I think that being able to learn from interactions with people who think about things a little bit differently than you normally do is such a gift, to be able to go to work every day, not in the pandemic, but let's say go to work and be able to walk down the hall and talk to a physicist who's thinking about the same problem you're thinking about, but from an entirely different angle. So I think the interdisciplinarity is really critical.
Yeah. Now, and is the BioFrontiers Institute part of UC Boulder?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Okay. So it's still considered part of academics.
Yes.
How about this? I'm looking up at my other screen at questions, by the way. So just don't think I'm looking away. So again, high level esoteric question. If there is one, what is a question that you always want someone to ask you, but might not get asked?
Oh. Huh. Well, I don't think I've ever been asked that question. I'm drawing a blank here. I mean, I participate in a lot of these kinds of things, and so I've been asked things
Lots of questions.
Lots of questions. I mean, yeah. I mean, people frequently are curious about what I do to relax.
Yeah. Well, what is it?
Cook.
Cook.
Yep. I'm a serious, serious cook.
Wow. And do you have all the foodie type kitchen things that a serious cook needs, or have you simplified it?
I think it's pretty simplified. I'm not a high-tech cook, but
Yeah.
I am a passionate cook and I love food. And so the pandemic has had me trying to teach myself to be a good Korean cook.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I've spent months now, and I think I'm getting pretty good. But I think the jury's still out on that one.
Okay. Another high level one. Actually, before I get there, Elizabeth, to answer your question about what other VCs are company builders. So I'll give you one. Like Third Rock, another one is Flagship Ventures, also based in Boston. They do a lot of company building. Leslie, do you know any more that sort of fall into that?
Yeah, maybe I might put the Column Group in that category.
Column Group? Okay.
Yeah, in Mission Bay.
Okay. And then Elizabeth, also on the Entrepreneurship at Cornell website, if you go onto it and look under the Discover tab, you will. Art.
So George Skango's just said Column also, and hi George.
Okay.
Great to see that you're out there.
That's great. We actually have a list of Cornell VCs on our website. If you can't find it, Elizabeth, you can just email me and I'll point you there. Okay, here's one. Most promising area of drug discovery for the next 10 years.
So my pick right now would be understanding the interactions of multiple genetic variants and how they coalesce to contribute to disease. I mean, that's a hard one, and but it's the one I would be most excited about. Because, you know, we all have heard of people who, for whatever reason, they have a mutation that should cause disease and doesn't. And other people who have something that's mild in one person, but extremely severe in somebody else. So genetic background, you know, people's genomes are now being sequenced right and left. And so I think the challenge, but the opportunity, is to figure that out.
Yep. How about this for another complicated question? What is something you've encountered that you've thought, if we had all the computing power necessary, so infinite computing power, we could revolutionize humanity? That's a hard question.
Yeah, it is, but it comes back to, I think it's related to what I just said, is that if we could take somebody's DNA and map out a personalized medicine or precision medicine course of action for maintaining health, what, you know, where things that we don't understand right now, you could say, okay, you need to be careful about this. And I'm not talking about 23andMe. I'm talking about something a lot more sophisticated, even though that's been quite useful to have.
Yep. So are you using AI in what you do now?
Not me personally, but yes.
But there's certainly room for application for it.
Yes, absolutely.
Cool. Some of these questions are just so scientific. So can you describe how scientists are approaching multiple mutations? Like the person says, what would I read? And is it being solved by AI? So
from a bench science standpoint, the way people are approaching this is and I deal with this with a lot of patients as well. So somebody comes to you and says, okay, I've got this progressive muscle problem, and they've had either their genome sequence just by different technologies. So they know what the sequences are, and they want to know from me or another scientist, which one of these changes in my genome are causing these, and can it be treated? Yep. And so that's a huge challenge. And it's also, there are a lot of issues, societal issues with this as well, because let's say I can do 5 assays in my lab and I don't see anything. That doesn't mean that gene isn't actually causing them their problem. What it means is I can't find it. And so that's why I think these more in silico approaches are going to be really key. So you go back and forth where you're validating something that's predicted computationally. And I'm involved in some projects like that, where I will do experiments and then feed back to them, and they'll put that into their modeling. And so as we get better and better at this, I think we will be able to say, okay, this is your problem in your genome, or these 5 things are the problems in your genome, and what can we do about it? Because if there's nothing you can do about it, that's not as informative, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to take one step up. We only have a few minutes left. So here's another one, not scientific necessarily. So as a scientist, how did you acquire the business knowledge you needed to start your companies? On that topic, what advice would you give other scientists who have a product or a prototype and are ready to begin to start the business stage?
Yeah, so for me, I have to go back to Mike Bristow, the guy who said to me, let's start a company for heart failure, because I don't think I would have, without him as a mentor, I doubt that I would have been able to realize the business side of this, just because it seemed so foreign to me. And he said, oh, it's simple. We'll just have to write a business plan. And I said, I don't even know what a business plan is. So I think that I think having him get me started by breaking down that barrier of activation of, saying, I don't know anything about business. That was a huge help to me. So I think that one of the things that I try to do now is to help other people who were in the situation that I was in, 25 years ago.
Yeah.
And we've got some pretty active mentoring, just like you guys are doing at Cornell. We have some pretty active programs going on at the University of Colorado. And I think we're doing well. Boulder is small, as a city, and there aren't too many VCs in Colorado themselves. There's some, but it doesn't have the wealth of Sand Hill Road, in Palo Alto, or
Right.
some of the areas around 128 in the Boston area.
Right. So this might be the last question. It's a perfect one to end with, by the way. How did your family, having such a reluctance at the start, end up reacting to your amazing life and all of your success?
So my stepfather's no longer alive, but I think he would have preferred it if I had married a plumber.
Oh, no. Well, we're all glad you didn't, by the way.
Not that there's anything wrong with being a plumber, but
no,
I
of
think
course
he would
not.
have preferred that I stayed at home and didn't. So I did learn a lot from having a reluctant family. It's that the best way to get me to do something is to tell me I can't.
Yep.
And I got a lot of, you can't do this. And then, of course, I showed them.
Yep. Yeah. I'll say you showed them more than once. Okay, listen, we are out of time. I just want to thank you again personally. I'll give a quick little closing here. Just so everyone knows, once the webinar ends, it just goes off quite quickly. So it just kind of bleeps right off. So I don't want anyone to be caught off guard. So as a reminder, today's program is being recorded. It'll be available on the CEN live stream channel and also the EHC YouTube channel as well. As a reminder, another reminder, don't miss out on the Entrepreneurship at Cornell celebration, which is a 2-day virtual event coming up at the end of April. Highlights of the celebration event this year will include some featured speakers, including Bob Langer, by the way, who's speaking with us. Well, obviously, you know Bob. Bob's the founder, one of the co-founders of Moderna, and I bet a bunch of you online have gotten the Moderna vaccine, amongst a bunch of other companies. We'll also feature our demo day for our eLab Accelerator, Student Business of the Year pitches, and we're also honoring Chuck Feeney for our first ever conferring of a Lifetime Achievement Award in entrepreneurship and humanity. For those that don't know, Chuck is the largest donor in Cornell's history. He did it all anonymously throughout his life. He gave away to Cornell just under $1 billion, but in total, he gave away an $8 billion fortune anonymously. And it's just now gone public, and we're honoring Chuck for that and all that he's done, also during celebration. So you can register for our celebration at the link in the chat. There's no charge this year because it's virtual. You can thank COVID for that, if nothing else. And again, Leslie, I just want to say thanks again for you taking the time. This has been absolutely fantastic, and I hope to have some more conversations with you soon.
Well, it was a lot of fun. Thanks to everybody for attending. I appreciate it.
Okay, thanks everybody. Have a nice rest of your day.
Thanks.
Okay, bye-bye.